Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Today we are wrapping up the Ethics. We're today looking at chapter 9 of the Ethics, of book 10, the last chapter of the Ethics, the last book, last chapter of the last book, the conclusion of the Ethics. And we always point that the conclusion of the Ethics points to a dialogue, a future dialogue of the politics. So this often leads us to the transition, right, of the politics. So let's continue. Let's go look at where we're going to start off over here, over there, and right there, to chapter 9. If then what concerns these matters, as well as the virtues, and further what concerns friendships and pleasures, have been sufficiently stated in the outline, one ought to suppose the task chosen has reached its end. In other words, he opens this with the first sentence saying, "Well, we've talked about we've what if what concerns this as these issues of happiness, right? Happiness, the way of life and happiness, the virtues, and what for friendships and pleasure has been stated, an outline, right? Ought one to suppose that we've come to an end, or just as it is said to be the case is the end as just as it is said to be the case is the end of the end and matter of actions not of action, not contemplating each thing in turn and understanding it, but rather doing them. So in other words, in matters of action, right? In other words, remember, the whole point of this is, even though he's had a discussion of contemplation, we're concerned with action, or the virtues here are always concerned with action. Ethicae is about action, doing. And therefore, the question here concerns us that what is it? It's therefore that the matters of contemplation, each thing in turn, and understanding them, but rather that doing them, executing them, right? And so, is knowing about virtue or excellence not sufficient either? But it is necessary instead to try to possess the virtues and make use of them, unless we become good in some other way. In other words, if our goal is, in other words, our goal is to become good, perhaps we need to exercise the virtues. So, should we be doing it, or should we be merely talking about it? Now, if speeches were sufficient by themselves to make people decent, they would they would justly fetch much pay and great, as Theogenes has it, and one ought to pay it. In other words, this is the idea that if speeches were enough to make people decent, those who give beautiful speeches should fetch much pay and great pay, as Theogenes pays it. But as things stand, speeches appear to have the capacity to exhort, and to incite those youths who are free, 38, Euluthios, free, liberal, are free, Euluthios, like some people say liberal, but I prefer free, also free, and to make someone who has a well-born character and is truly a lover of what is beautiful or noble, receptive to virtue. In other words, speech can excite or extort those who are young and free, and to make those who have, in other words, also to make someone of well-born character and lover, and truly a lover of what of the beautiful, the kalos, to be receptive to virtue. So therefore, it is a it can it has the capacity to exhort and to incite, and both the free, and those who have a good character, well-born character, and love what is noble, to virtue. Yet speeches are incapable of exhorting the many to nobility and goodness, nobility or beautifulness, nobility, what is noble, the kalos, there's adjective of this. In other words, 39, to gentlemanliness, the kalos agathos, okay, to the the good, the noble and good things, to many, okay, that's the to gentlemen. You can, in other words, exhorting the many to the kalokagathia. It's one word here. This is one word. This is nobility and goodness, beautiful in goodness, the beauty and goodness, beauty and goodness. To beauty, nobility is kalos. Kalo means both what what is noble, fine, and beautiful, and agathia is agathos, good, what is good, so goodness. Agathia is goodness, and koloathia is nobility and goodness, right? The nobility and goodness, the kolo. That's the gentleman. The gentleman is the kolo, ho koloagathia. For the many are not naturally obedient to the governing governance. In other words, the many, the hoi polloi, remember the many, hoi polloi, the hoi polloi are not naturally obedient to the governance supplied by the sense of shame. Now, shame, the word is adios, reverence. In other words, the word here is adios, reverence, awe, rather than eriskon, shameful, ugly. In other words, awe. In other words, I think this is the problem. The word here is ideal. So why does he sense of shame? Because shame is to the ugly and like this. We talked about shame. I disagree with Bartlett's and Collins' use of shame here. A sense of lack of awe. Let's talk about lack of awe, a lack of reverence, a lack of respect. In other words, the many are not naturally obedient to the governance supplied by awe or respect, but rather to that supplied by fear. So they don't have reverence and awe and respect, but rather to fear. And they do not naturally abstain from base things because of the shamefulness involved, but do so rather because of the vengeance that may be extracted. In other words, they do. This is again Machiavelli's love. The many are driven by not awe and respect, but rather what? That by fear of punishment, fear of what because they are not they do not naturally abstain from the base things because of shamefulness, but they abstain from the base thing because they fear vengeance instructed them. For since they live by passion, live by desire, they pursue the pleasures that are theirs, together with what gives rise to those pleasures, and they avoid opposing pain. So, in other words, the people live by the passion. They pursue the pleasures that are the pleasures that they're inclined towards, that they're pleasures, and that they will together with what gives rise to those pleasures, and they avoid the the things that give them pain. As for what is beautiful, kalos, and truly pleasant, they do not even have a conception of it, never having tasted it. In other words, they only know. In other words, their argument is they don't know. They've never tasted the beautiful and the good, the kalos, the beautiful and the good, the beautiful and the noble, and the truly pleasant. They've never tasted it, and because they've never tasted, they only seek what they know. They only seek the base or the vile pleasures that they have tasted. So what speech might reform people of this sort? For it is not possible, nor is it easy to alter by means of speech what has long been enforced by their characters. Now 41, another reading based on the transitions, but forced by their habits. Eristai versus, in other words, the character eistai rather than eistai. This is the problem of this is why Greek is very playful. There's two words. One is estai, rather than isthestai. Isthestai is character, right? This is the this is their characters, their characters. Where esthestai is habits. So this is the Greek in here. Depends if you understand the A or the E, the character, the interconnection between the stronger A, the different letter, but it is the A versus the E, and therefore the different sound of the word leads to a difference between character. Is it their characters, right? Their character, who they are, what are they made of, right? Their character, or their habits. And habits and character are very connected in this sense. Remember, he said all the way back earlier in previous books. But perhaps it is a desirable enough thing if when everything through which we are held to become decent is present, we might have some share in virtue. In other words, we would prefer that their character and their habits of this. And it's not easy to reinforce what is not present. It is not possible or easy to alter by means of speech what has not been enforced by their character or their habits. But it is desirable enough if when everything through which we held to become decent is present, we might share in some virtue. In other words, we need to share in some virtue. Some suppose that people become good by nature. Some people suppose that people become good by nature, physis. Others that we do so by habit, and others that it is through teaching, logos, others, through learning things, teaching. So remember, nature, habit, and teaching, learning. Okay. Um, Now, as for what comes from nature, it is clear. There's three dimensions. There's things that are things by nature, things that we what get through habit, and the things that we learn from reason or we are taught. Okay, things that are teachable, learned in that sense, right? That as for what comes from nature is clear that it is not present due to us. Rather, it is present through certain divine causes for those who are truly fortunate. In other words, if you have a nature, if your natures are something, this is something that has been given. It's not something you choose. It is what has been given to you. Some divine cause gave you this. Um, Rather, it is through divine causes for those who are truly fortunate, right? Those people that by nature. And speech and teaching never prevail in all cases. In other words, speech and teaching never prevails in all cases. But the soul of the student, now literally the listener or auditor, right? The one who listens, must be prepared beforehand by means of habit so as to feel delight in hatred in a beautiful way, noble way, kolos way, just as must land will that will nourish the seed. In other words, you have to cultivate the land. You just can't put seed in the land. For the crop to grow, the land must be fertile. The land must be cultivated so that it can produce the seed. So too with this the person here, that if the person isn't have the right habits, the speech won't affect anything. That teaching won't work. In other words, you have to cultivate this person through habits. Remember, cultivate the idea of shaping the land, right? Shabbats are the things shaping the nature of the land. So there's that by nature is that, but then also habit, right? And then last, teaching. Teaching is the weakest. Teaching needs either nature or habit. If you don't have the right nature, sorry, and the right habits, speaking won't work. You need to have the right habits or the right nature, like the cultivated land, right? So the student must be prepared beforehand as the means as to feel. In other words, um, uh, uh, and speech and teaching never prevails in all cases, but the soul of the student must be prepared beforehand by means of habit, so as to feel delight and hatred in a noble way, beautiful way, just as land will be nourished. That land will nourish the seed. For someone who lives according to passion would not listen to a speech meant to deter him, nor in turn would even comprehend it. In other words, that if you're living by passions and only by passions, you don't know the habits to restrain those things, you will never even, they not only will not act to it, you don't even hear the speech, he said, not comprehend it. And how is it not possible to change? And how is it and how is it possible to change a person of that sort by means of persuasion? In other words, you can't just mere persuasion won't change a person who's not open to it. In other words, they won't even hear the persuasion. They're not in a condition of habit that will allow, or nature. Their character is not that way, but nor is the habit allow. That's why this is why the double thing of this is why that weird use of the doubleness of that these two words are so similar. Character and habit are so similar in the language. Is that the one is stronger than the other, right? That's the difference. One is the strong, one is the long, stronger vowel that begins it. The a versus the e, and therefore there is that idea here that he would not even comprehend it, right? And how is it possible to change a person of that sort of means by persuasion? In general, passion seems to yield not to speech, but to force, dominus, dominus, force, something applied to it, something applied, dominus. So there must first be an underlying character that is somehow appropriate to virtue, arete, one that feels affection for the beautiful and the noble, kalos, and disgust at the shameful. So you must have the character, habit. You must either have the character or the habit that you want, as you're inclined to desire the beautiful and disgusted at the shameful. That they are able to, they have the appropriate virtue. They're open to the virtue because they feel affection, they want, they desire the noble, and they disgust at the shameful. To obtain from childhood a correct upbringing with a view to virtue is difficult for someone not reared under laws of the requisite sort. In other words, if you're living under bad laws, laws that are don't produce good, bad laws that produce bad behavior, bad character, it's going to be hard to if you don't have a society. That, in other words, the argument is the laws. If you're not, if how can you be reared under the laws of the required sort? For living in a moderate and controlled way is not pleasant to the many, especially the young. Hence, by means of laws, force, right, force, which then create habit, right? The rearing and the regular practices involved must have already been put into a proper order, for once these become habitual, they will not be painful. In other words, laws are like habits. Habits are like laws. Habits are the things we do that train us. Like brushing our teeth in the morning, getting up and brushing our teeth, going to those are habits. Doing it, habits are the certain patterns of. It's not, in other words, they're things that they're not our nature, but Aristotle calls them a second nature. Right? The habits are these patterns that reinforce the nature, make possible the nature. That if something that's natural there, but a habit makes it adds to and helps strengthen something, or makes better. Hence, by means of laws, in other words, the laws of living in a moderate way is not pleasant to many. Hence, by means of laws and rearing and the regular practice involved must have already been put in the proper order. For once these become habitual, they will not be painful. And in like manner, it is not sufficient if people, when they're young, attain the correct rearing. In other words, and in a like manner, it is not sufficient if people, when they are young, attain the correct rearing and care. Rather, once they have reached adulthood, they must also make a practice of these things and thus be habituated. In other words, they have to make a practice of it. They have to have a practice. So the young not only just knows what they are, the habits of it, they must be able to start behaving that way. And they become habituated in that sense. So therefore, it's not just merely that they have the correct rearing and care, but rather once they reach adulthood, they have been so shaped by them, habituated by them, that they do them. It becomes their nature. So let's go look at this more. And uh, and for these matters, indeed, for life as a whole, more generally, we would need laws. In other words, and for these matters, and indeed for life more generally, we would need laws. Laws are what? Laws are the kind of social habits. These are the instruments that we shape the character of people, shape their habits, shape their behaviors, what we expect from them. For the many obey the governance of necessity more than of speech, logos. Right? The necessity. Uh, they obey the governance of necessity rather than speech, and of punishments more than what is beautiful, kalos. So the many are not moved by the kalos. They're not moved by the many are not moved by speech. The many are moved by necessity. They're moved by punishment, not the noble. Hence, some suppose that legislatures ought to encourage people in the direction of virtue and exhort them to act for the sake of what is noble, beautiful, right? The sake of what is noble, kalos, on the grounds that those who have been decently guided beforehand by means of habits will be obedient, whereas those who are disobedient and too deficient in nature, they suppose the legislature ought to inflict on them various chastisements, as well as acts of vengeance. The wholly incurable they ought to banish. In other words, they should what? They should habituate people to act well. In other words, the purpose of this is what? On the grounds that on those who have been decently guided beforehand by means of habits will be obedient, where those who are disobedient and are too deficient in nature, they suppose legislature ought to what? Punish them, inflict on them chastisements, as well as acts of penalty, vengeance. And the wholly incurable, right? They ought to banish, get rid of, remove, separate. For they suppose someone who lives decently, with a view to what is beautiful, noble, kalos, will be obedient to the governance of speech, whereas someone who strives for pleasure in a base manner must be chastised by means of pain, like a beast of burden. In other words, if you are governed by reason, if you're governed by reason, you can be moved by speech, persuasion. But if you're not governed by reason, but only by pain, pleasure, you can only be moved by pain. Like, how do you deal with animals to get them to do what you want to do? You have to, you use coercion, you use force. Now, I know a friend of mine saying, but dogs, you don't use coercion on dogs. The dogs can be trained. And still, there's different levels of coercion. Those use force. It is force, either verbal force, authority force, status force. It's not persuasion. You don't persuade. You don't use logos. You don't lose logos. Animals are without speech. They are moved by command, authority, force. So, for they suppose someone who lives decently with a view to what is noble, beautiful, will obedient to speech, whereas someone who strives for pleasure in a base manner must be chastised like by means of pains, like beasts of burden. Hence, they also assert that there ought to be such pains as are especially opposed to the pleasures a person is fond of. In other words, you have to have pleasures and pain. This is the famous thing of Lycurgus, of Plutarch's Lycurgus, the pleasures and pains. Because many are going to be given by pleasures, you need that you need to have equal. We call what he says equally opposed to the pleasures, pains as equally opposed to the pleasures that people are fond of. They need both pleasures and pains. If then, as was said, the person who would be good must be reared and habituated in a beautiful manner, close manner, and subsequently live his life in this way, the decent regular practices, and do nothing base, whether involuntary or voluntary, then these things will come to pass for those people who live in accord with a certain intellect, unus, and a correct ordering, provided such an ordering has strength behind it. In other words, you need teeth behind it, teeth, strength, force behind it. In other words, as long as people are decent, right? In other words, if then it was said, if a person who will be good must be reared and habituated in a noble manner, subsequently live his life in this way with regular decent practices, and do nothing base, either voluntary or involuntary, these things will come to pass for those people who live in accord with a certain intellect, mind, and correct ordering, provided such ordering has strength behind it. The ordering needs some power behind it. Now, the command characteristic of a father does not have such strength or compulsion behind it. So therefore, the power of the father, the command characteristics of a father does not have the strength or compulsion behind it. Nor indeed does the command of a man in general, unless he is a king or something of that sort, or something so powerful, has to have power, has to have a power beyond that of a father, a king or something of that sort, commander. In other words, but the law does have a compulsory power. It being speech that proceeds from a certain prudence and intellect. So, in other words, law is it is a speech, logos, that proceeds from a prudence and a nous. In other words, laws does have a like a king. In other words, kings have more power than fathers. The power of a father does not command to compel in the same way to obey that does a king does. That's why he has power, coercion, violence behind him. So in the law has what? It's speech that proceeds from prudence, phronesis, and intellect. But and though people hate those who those other human beings who oppose their impulses, even if the latter are correct to do so. The law is not invidious when it orders what is equitable. In other words, a person. If you have a person doing it, there's resentment. You come to resent the person who makes you good, who opposes this. But the law is not a person; it is simply just the rule in that sense. And therefore, in other words, the law. Whereas this is interesting. He says the law is not invidious when it orders others to what is equitable. 43, or decent or fitting, epicetus, what is fitting or decent. And he says equitable, what is decent or fitting. In other words, the law is not invidious, whereas what happens is that we come to hate those who oppose our impulses. Only in the city of the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans, right? For Aristotle's harsh treatment of the Spartans' rearing and education, considered politics too book 2:9, right? Which I've talked about in the video on that that we've talked about in the previous video on Aristotle's politics. Go check that video in the politics section in book 2, chapter 9. Or, in other words, only in the city of Lycemedonian, or it together with a few others, is the legislature held to have taken care for the rearing and regular practices of the citizens. So, in other words, only in various cities. And by the way, it's interesting. He presents the idea that he presents here Sparta as a example of where the lawgiver, legislator, held to take care of the rearing and the regular practice of citizens. Okay, but then remember he criticizes it. It's he has a very strong, powerful criticism of it in book 2 of the politics. But in most cities, what concerns such things has been utterly neglected, and each lives as he wishes, laying down the sacred law for the children and wife in the manner of the Cyclops. Here, Homer Odyssey, book 9, lines 112 to 115, as well as politics, Aristotle's politics books. I think this is in book 2, chapter 2 of book 1, at 1252b 22 and 23. The root of the principle here is themis, not the usual nomos, and can suggest divine or sacred law. Now, themis, not nomos. So the rule here is the sacred laws, the themis, not the nomos. Therefore, this is interesting. That in other words, most cities concern this as neglected, and each father or each lives as he wish, head of the household lays it down using themis, the divine things, not nomos, as in the Cyclops, right? The most excellent, the highest, best thing, then, the highest thing, then, is for the public care to be correct. Now, here is common, konoi. Why does he say public? Common, the konoi, the common, thing that's shared. This is the public. Public is the thing shared, okay? The English, the Punic, the public comes from the Latin. This is the thing that is shared. Republica, the public. This is the shared, the common thing. Res, the thing public, of the public, publica, which is what we share, right? The thing that we share in common, the konoi. Care to be correct. In other words, let's literally say this: the most beautiful, the most highest, not most beautiful, the most excellent, highest thing, then, is for the public care to be correct. In other words, the thing care of the common things to be orthos, or a 7057, this point of the translation, the capable of doing this, but most editors follow by where I delete it and remove it to the place indicated at note 48 below. By this point would produce the translation and capable of doing this, but most editors are following Bayward delete it. So therefore the question is, okay, in other words, would care would be care to be would care to be orthos, correct, and I think you should leave it, and capable of doing this. But when cities utterly neglect the public care, the common goods, the common things, it would seem appropriate for each individual to contribute to the virtue of his own offspring and friends, or at least to make the choice to do so. 48. Bywater suggests moving the phrase indicated above, noted as such, the latter half as present sentence, would read, to the virtue of his own children and friends, and the capacity of doing so, or at least to make the choice to do so. So therefore you do so. In other words, if you don't have the care for the common, you don't have this public care, the public laws that really care about the common thing, then what you need to do is what? Then in each city utterly neglect the public care, the common care. Okay, it would appropriate for each individual to contribute to his own, to the virtue of his own offspring and his friends, or at least to make them make the choice to do so, to have the care for this. Yet, on the basis of what has been said, it would seem that a person is more capable to do this by becoming a skilled legislator. So now we have you can, in other words, you can do this, even the private thing, in other words, that the way you make your friends, your children, and your friends, and care for the common thing, in other words, what basis of what has been said, it would seem that a person is more apt to be able to do this by becoming a skilled legislator. For it is clear that the public care, the common cares, comes into being through laws, and decent care through decent care through serious laws, the serious laws, budios, nomos, budio nomos, right? Laws. But whether these laws are written or unwritten would seem to make no difference, nor whether through them one person or many will be educated. In other words, it doesn't matter if they're written or unwritten, or if only one person or many will be educated. Just as it does not matter either in the case of music or gymnastics and the other practices in that sense. In other words, it doesn't require that you just have to get one. This doesn't matter either. It's a tech. Now he's suggesting that it's kind of a techne. The case of music or gymnastics, not everyone does it. Maybe just one person be knowledgeable about it. One, in other words, this knowledge of law legislator. Does everyone have to have it, or just only one person who knows have to know it? As same thing with gymnastics and music, right? For just as it is, for just as it is, the laws and customs, or characteristic ethei, right? As elsewhere, the glossary book, book as in book 1, note 14, right? So this is the 49 customs, or because this is the word ethe, characters, customs, just as just as it is the laws and customs or characters that hold sway in the city, so also it is the speeches and habits of the father that do so in the household. So therefore law and customs hold sway in the city. Speeches and habits of the father hold sway in the household. And these latter, to a greater degree on account of the kinship and benefactions, the benefits of this, in other words, involved. For from the outset, household members feel affection for one another and are readily obedient by nature. So the affection, in other words, this is interesting. The household has more natural affection to each other because there's a kind of sense of benefaction, benefactor and care. That there is a more affection, and therefore they're more obedient. And feels, in other words, at the outset, household members feel affection for one another and are more readily obedient by nature. In other words, if you're being benefited, in other words, you're obedient by nature. Why? Because there's a sense of you're okay, that my parents have cared for me. I've cared for me. There's care and love, and I reciprocate that back by obedience. Okay, there's this conception of the sense, right? So, therefore, in other words, the law and customs are weaker versions than the power, speeches, and habits of the father. Why? Because of the what? That the household has more affection. In other words, therefore, in other words, the affection that people have the stronger the affection people have for each other in the city, the more, in other words, the speeches and the speeches and habits of the rulers are player. But now, without that, you need what? But that requires a lot, and you need more. You need laws and customs. Laws and customs are for the city. Further, individual education also differ from public one, common ones. In other words, individual education, different common one. Just as the case of medicine suggests. In other words, the medicine that we get. Here's the problem: the medicine. Medicine common laws are common. Everyone shares it. But you can't do this. Medicine has to be, when a doctor treats you, you have to treat the specific case. So individual education differs from public one because the individual education is tailored to the student, as the doctor's care is tailored to the patient, right? And the skilled boxer, in a like manner, does not prescribe to all the same kinds of fightings. In other words, the skilled boxer does not just do fighting in general. He's going to specialize and is going to understand the kind of fighting that's good for him. That sense. So it might seem that what pertains to each person would be more precise when there is a private care involved. For in that case, each attains what is suitable to a greater degree. So therefore, here, this is the interesting thing. In other words, the care, the specific of training, the care that you need to have, that in other words, that the training of the thing cares more for the particular, not the abstract man in general, but to the particular man, right? That's involved. But a doctor, gymnastic trainer, and everyone else would best exercise care in the individual case by knowing what applies to all and what applies to this or that sort of person. For the science are said to be and are concerned with what is common or universal. In other words, science is concerned with what is common and what is universal. So yes, that the doctor needs this, but the doctor can only apply this because he knows what's common, what is applied to all. So in other words, the gymnastic, these trainers would best exercise care. Sorry for that interruption. We just got a message and care for this, right? So he goes, what is it? But the idea is that, so talk about the difference between general education, general thing, and the private care. The difference between medical care that's more like involved, precise, and this and then. But a doctor gymnastic must also know the general principle, right? Because it's science is, in other words, you must know the science, the general principle, to be able to best explain the difference between the individual care to what is best, right? So therefore, of course, nothing prevents someone, even someone without scientific knowledge, from exercising a noble, kalos, care for a certain individual, provided that he has, through experience, contemplated in a precise way the results of for each, just as some people seem to be their own best doctors but are unable to aid another at all, right? In other words, my experience of my thing particular. Someone cannot not have learning, not have knowledge, or not have science, but because of experience knows how to resolve their, but they and give good, noble, fine, noble, kalos, care, beautiful care, for a certain individual, precise, that even by themselves, or someone else, my experience of that person and knowing their habits and knowing their things, I may not know medicine, but I know I can help you, and that make you noble care. But this is not available to other people, right? From noble care to a certain individual, provided that he has, through experience, contemplated in a precise way the results for each, just as even some people seem to be their own best doctors, but are unable to aid another at all, right? So let's go to the next paragraph. Yet it seems, let's go here. It might seem to be no less necessary, at least for someone who wishes to become skilled in the art, in a given art, or in contemplation, to proceed to the universal and become acquainted also with this to the extent possible. In other words, skilled at a given art or in contemplation, to proceed to the universal and become, in other words, it must, in other words, wish to be skilled in the given art or in contemplation, have to deal with the universal and be acquainted also with this to the extent possible, the whole. For it, for it was said that it is with the universal that the sciences are concerned. And perhaps it is necessary also for someone who wishes to make others better through his care, whether these be many or few, to attempt to become a skilled legislature, as if it should be through laws that we become good. In other words, how do we become good? Should it be through? In other words, if we become good through laws, then the legislature. If, in other words, we should choose to, if we're caring to be improving people, in other words, in case those who wish to make others better through their care. So a doctor makes himself better. He must know. He must have be aware of the general. Okay, so that therefore they could make people better. Right? Know what the better is. Know what's possible, whether it be many or few, to attempt to become a skilled legislature, if it be through laws that we become good. For it does not belong to just any chance person to inculcate a noble disposition, a beautiful disposition, kalos disposition, in whomever happens to be set before him. Rather, if this belongs to anyone, it would be to a knower, just as with medicine and what else has a certain care. That's weird. I'm gonna That was just a flippy machine decided to go flip on something. In other words, it's a knower. Someone who knows it will be moment. The computer decided to freak out and launch a program for no reason at all. So I had to deal. I paused for a second and dealt with that stupid internet, the computer problem. In other words, it does not belong to any chance person to do this characteristic, but someone has to be a knower, right? And just as with medicine and what has been whatever else has a certain care and prudence associated with it. So a doctor has both care, a certain kind of care to do something, but a judgment, a prudence, dealings with the particular. Remember, prudence is always about the particular. It always has to do with the particular. So a knowledge in general, but how to apply that knowledge in the particular case. In that sense, that's a weird question. And I think this would lead to kind of Kantian views of this. But now, remember, prudence is something that deals particularly action. So then, therefore, this is a weird thing. That the idea is techne. The idea is that there is a kind of techne. The lawmaker is kind of like an expert, um, a craftsman, but a craftsperson, a person exercising techne. But this is like the medicine's a techne person. But the medicine is more than techne because it has to deal with a kind of thing. So therefore, this paragraph ends. It's not. In other words, it requires someone with a certain kind of what to inculcate. And if you want to inculcate a beautiful disposition in whomever happens to be set before him, right? Okay, therefore, you just can't be any chance person. You have to be someone trained, a knower of how to what make people know what the just is, but also know how to make them just, and how not only make them just in general, but know how to make this person just, right? Like a doctor does. So just as with medicine and whatever else that has a certain care and prudence associated with it, it is necessary then after this. So, to examine from what source or how someone might become a skilled legislature, or how can become skilled legislature, how from what source or how they become a skilled legislature, or is it just as in the other cases from those who are skilled politicians? So, in other words, is nomothetic something a legislator something different from a politician? Is it something special, or is it from those who are skilled? Excellent, the skilled politician, not the unskilled politicians. For this legislative skill seems to be part of the political art, politike, right? Refers this reference would seem to be to 1141b1 and to 26 in the contents, right? So therefore, this idea, this is for the legislative skill seems to be part of the political art. It's a part of the political art. Or does the same thing appear not to pertain in the case of the political art as in that of the other sciences and capacities? In other words, or does the same thing appear not to pertain in other words, the other arts is that there are other this art and this sometimes you have there's an art that is a part of this art, or as you say what is true in the other arts that have subordinate arts or arts that are part of this larger art. The legislature is the legislature part of politics? Is it something separate from it, or is it part of it? Or does this not apply? The same thing appears not to pertain in the case of the political art as in that of the other sciences and capacities. For in those others, it is manifestly the same people who both transmit the capacities in question and are engaged in the corresponding activities. For example, the doctor and the painter, right? The doctor both knows the thing and then does it, right? The painter both knows, and paints, right? But as for matters of politics, the sophists possess to teach them, but none of them undertake political action. So this idea, this is the problem. Art, this is the thing. Political scientists, the sophists used to teach about politics, but the sophists didn't undertake politics. Okay, this is the Greeks. The sophists are today's political scientists. In other words, do you need to be a political? Most political scientists, including me, are not politicians. We don't engage in it, but sometimes we do directly as citizens or something like this. But not very few of us are going to. Woodrow Wilson was the first political scientist to become president. So come on, there are some who do it, but usually they're bad, right? So therefore, for matters of politics, the sophists possess to teach them, but none of them undertake political actions. It is rather those who are engaged in political life who would seem to do this by dint of a certain capacity and experience, rather than by means of thought. In fact, this is the famous line that explains what, in other words, statesmen. We should, if you want to understand political action, then you study the other political actors, people who've done it. In other words, teaching of politics in general and listening to the smarty pants who understand politics is not best way to learn politics. Is rather look at the examples of those who did it. Right. This is how we teach statesmanship. This is the looking at the lives of political actors and learning. Plutarch's Lives is a perfect example of this. Plutarch's Lives. You study Plutarch's Lives. You study biographies. Why? By studying the biographies, you learn from the political actor their experience. And this is different from how the political scientist does it, who teaches general principles and central things, right? In other words, rather it is those who engage in political life who seem to do this by dint of a certain capacity and experience, rather than by means of thought. For they manifestly neither write nor speak about such things, though perhaps this would be nobler than making speeches for courtrooms and popular assemblies. In other words, that if they're going to write something, if they're going to do something, instead of writing speeches and it'd be more nobler for them to talk about what they've done and how to be what they are. So therefore, their biographies is nobler than their speeches in their for their speeches for courtrooms or assemblies. So real statesmanship really shouldn't pay attention to their speeches, but their actions. Pay attention to their actions, their deeds, their character, and the actions that they do, not their speeches. That's very interesting. Nor in turn have they made their own sons or any of their friends into skilled politicians. In other words, they don't necessarily. A skilled politician doesn't always make their sons or their friends into skilled politicians either. They don't. In other words, they don't always do this. In other words, there is therefore. In other words, they don't even write down what the things they do. They manifest neither write or speak about such things, about how to be a good politician, a skilled politician. And rarely do they teach their own, even their own sons or their friends to be so. Right? This is rare, but this would be a reasonable thing to do if they were so able. In other words, if they were able to. In other words, there's a difference. He seems to suggest that there might be a difference between being able to do a thing and being able to know and teach a thing. Teaching and doing and teaching, knowing and doing, teaching, knowing to do versus knowing to teach others may not be the same thing. So therefore, yes, it'd be better that the ones who knew how to do it should teach, but this is rare. And the funny part is those who know how to teach but don't necessarily know how to act, rule. Okay, this is the know how to do. They know they think they know how to do, but they don't go then do. Um, for there is nothing better they could have bequeathed to the cities, nor is there anything they would have chosen to possess for themselves, or indeed for those dearest to them, other than a capacity of this kind. In other words, to make other better. In other words, if they really were capable of doing this, wouldn't it be better that they would make others better? Isn't this the critique? Isn't this the problem of the intellect, the contemplative mind, who only can deals with its own actions and this stuff? It's beautiful, it's pleasure, but doesn't care. Isn't this the danger of the Socratic position to only mind one's business? Isn't this the critique of Cicero against Socrates' view of justice? Do no harm. That is not only do no harm, but to help those who have been harmed, right? To rescue, give aid to those who are being harmed. To prevent harm being done on others. That this is also the second half of justice, and that the philosopher the Socratic position of justice is negligent on the fuller conception of justice for Cicero. For there is nothing better than they could have bequeathed to cities, nor is there anything they would have chosen to profess for themselves, or indeed for those dearest to them, other than the capacity of this kind making them better, right? Each yet experience does seem to make no small contribution. So in other words, knowledge of this, having knowledge of this and teaching that knowledge. But then he says, but notice this, but yet experience does seem to make no small contribution. For otherwise people would not have become skilled politicians through living together with others in a political community, right? This is this final phase, the word sunothea, which means living or herding together, or the habits formed by communal living. The same word appears at the crucial place in Plato's Meno, a dialogue that bears directly on Aristotle's argument here concerning the special, if limited, skill of the politician. Consider Plato's Meno's 96d and the following, in that sense, right? There is this limits in the political. In other words, the political guy who's living together. We're living at the skill of become skilled politicians who living together with others in the community. Hence, those who aim at knowing about the political art seem to need experience in addition. This is the problem. This is why the political scientist is problematic. You can know it, but if you don't have experience, then you really don't know it. You don't really fully know it. Therefore, you need to do this. Maybe this is the argument. Maybe political scientists should be forced to spend some time in government, some time in that thing, do things in that sense. to run for office, or help people run for office, or advise people running for office in that sense. They need experience in this sense. Okay, yep. But those sophists who possess to teach the political art appear to be very far from doing so. So the sophists, this is a critique of the sophists. The sophists who claim to be teaching the political art are really far from really doing it. This again, this explains why in book 2 he criticizes Hippodamus and the other Phalion, or I forget the guy's name, those two other peoples for their teaching of the critique of Hippodamus is the most famous one, right? About these sophists, these people, wise people who are, in fact, this idea that the first legislature is Hippodamus, right? This idea who's a city administrator, the builder of cities. Um, this is a problem in that sense, and that he seems to be kind of one who has he's better than the sophists. In other words, Aristotle does not really go attack the sophist in the same way Plato does. He doesn't give a Protagoras, doesn't critique Protagoras, doesn't critique Gorgias to a great degree, although he kind of praises Gorgias being right in some ways and hitting on the truth a little bit right on some things. But the other Protagoras and the other sophists of the era, he doesn't really. Instead, he gives these people who are engaging in statecraft or political craft. Plato is the only person he criticizes who's not a legislator, right? Plato, both his Socrates too, in the Republican Laws, right? And then to Hippodamus and felt like, Phaedron, I forget the name. It's going to drive me crazy. I don't have my text right in front of me, so I'm going to have to kind of guess. I don't want to guess. Um, book 2, different characters. So let's go to this now. He goes, what? For in general, they do not even know what sort of thing it is, or with what sort of things it is concerned. So therefore, the sophists really don't know what sort of things it is, or what sort of things it's concerned. Otherwise, they would not have posited it as being the same thing as rhetoric, or even inferior to it. Nor would they have supposed that legislating is an easy thing by simply putting together a collections of well-regarded laws. There's the sophists who think, oh, it's an easy thing. Let's get these laws. Here's these laws. No, it's no easy thing. In other words, this political art is it's not an easy art. It's more complicated. It's not mere rhetoric. It's not inferior. It's not something the same as rhetoric or even inferior to it, but rather something that is not something easy. For they suppose it is easy to pick out the best laws, as if the selection were not even part of the comprehension involved, and as if the correct judging of them were not the greatest thing, just as in music. In other words, just as in music, knowing the music to pick, knowing the music how to. In other words, the music is very interesting. Knowing which music is best, what is the tone, what is the appropriate thing for the appropriate thing. In other words, the idea that legislation is like music in that sense, that the music, there's a whole range of notes. So what is the best notes for the song in question? That you're going to have the laws. You know what the laws are. You're going to pick the laws and just throw a bunch of laws out there. This is no easy thing. It's knowing what, as the musician, as the great musicians need to know what works well to do with the right thing. The law has to be the right law for the right people in the place. Right. This is the point. The best law is this is such an easy thing that it's random. It's like the same that music is just random contemplations of notes and symbols. No, it's not. This is why the sophists are kind of joking in this way. For those with the relevant expertise in such things, judge the works involved correctly, and they comprehend through what or with through what or how the works are brought into completion, and what sort of things are in harmony with what. In other words, again, this is using the meta. They know their experience. They know what works, what doesn't work. They know they know what and how uh, the works are brought to completion, right? How to complete it, how to deliver it, and what sort of things are in harmony and what are with what. For the inexperienced, it is desirable enough if it does not entirely escape their notice whether the work has been done well or badly, as in the art of painting. In other words, being able to judge something is doesn't requires less skill than making it. This is why it's easy to be a critic. It's easy to judge. It's harder to do. My wife can do. I get involved. I have some. I used to cook more. I cook less. And when she cooks something, I make comments on it, and she gets mad at me, saying, "Why don't you do it?" That's that. It's easier to be the kind of judge to give uh, to give comments. I know it's easier to know what is the right thing. I have some knowledge of what is right and what is wrong, and therefore I can give that. But it's harder to do it right because there's too many. It's more complicated. The doing it correctly requires experience. The knowing about what is good and bad and what is proper or not may not. May not necessarily have to have the full experience of things. Um, so whether the work has been done well or badly, as in the art of painting, right? But laws are like works or products of the political. In other words, but laws are like works or products of the political art. So laws are the techne, thing produced by the political art, the techne, political techne. How then would someone become a skilled legislator as the result of those collections of well-regarded laws, or judge the best laws? Now, how could it just be just collecting all these? How would someone become a skilled legislator as a result of those collections of well-regarded laws, or judge the best laws? For physicians too do not appear to come into being as a result of reading treatises, though such treatises attempt at least to state not only the treatments, but also by distinguishing the various characteristics of each patient, how physicians might cure each of them, and how they ought to treat them. So, therefore, in other words, you can have a treatise. You can have a treatise. The doctors have these case books that say, okay, this is this illness, and therefore, if you have this person with this and this, and this is how you treat them, right? So, therefore, this is little. Doctors have a kind of treatise. In other words, learning the laws and reading these treatises, is not always the best way. Even though doctors have such treatises, the doctors you can have it a certain way, but okay. These treatises do seem profitable to some with experience, but they are useless to those without the requisite knowledge. So, in other words, you need to have the knowledge in order to use them profitably. So, if you have experience, in other words, these treatises with those experience, this is very profitable, but they are useless to those without that knowledge. Perhaps then collections of both laws and regimes would be good use to those who are capable of contemplating and judging what is noble or is contrary, and what sort of things accord with which circumstances. So, in other words, okay, knowing what the best laws and the best regimes are, well, that's not good enough on its own. You need to be able to know what is good. You have to have what? You have to, it would be good. Would be good. Just having what is the best laws, what are the a collection of laws and regimes would not be useful without knowing, being able to contemplating and judging what is the noble, the kalos, or its base, the contemporary, its contrary, the base, right? And what sort of things accord to which circumstances, right? So the particular and the general, the general and the particular, right? Knowing what is noble in the general, and then knowing what is noble and base in the particular. the circumstances. As for those without this characteristic who go through such collections, it would not fall to them to judge nobly, unless they should happen to do so accidentally. Though they might perhaps gain by thereby gain greater comprehensions of these matters. In other words, those who don't have this understanding of what is they are not. In other words, you need to be trained first with good judgment. The argument is before you can estimate and learn from these categories of laws and categories of regimes. You have to have good judgment to understand to understand these and when they are useful and apply in circumstances, when they would be useful and beneficial, when they would be harmful, when they would be noble or they would be base, right? They would have to understand the characteristics of things, the application between the general principle and the particular to the particular to the general, right? The situations of this city and this place and this people, to what laws would best suit them to get the best outcome, make them better, not worse, right? Therefore, this would require some level of knowledge first. You could learn these rules and just hit it by accident. They could, in other words, it would not fall to them to judge beautifully, kalos, right? Unless they should happen to do so accidentally. Though they might perhaps thereby gain greater competence. They screw up, and they learn something. Experience can be a teacher, right? In other words, they try and they accidentally hit on it, and they see, oh, this works, so I should do this more, right? And then it doesn't work over here. Okay, I should learn what works, right? Accident, they learn by experience without knowledge. Now, since those prior to us have left undiscovered what pertains to legislation. So in other words, those who come before us not really undiscovered what pertains to legislation. It is perhaps better for us to investigate it ourselves. So let's look at what is legislation, and indeed what concerns the regime in general. So that to the extent of our capacity, the philosophy concerning human affairs might be completed. In other words, the philosophy concerning human affairs might be completed. So therefore, we have to do two things: the legislature and the regime. Now, what's so interesting is if we look at Aristotle's politics, we don't get a discussion of legislation. In other words, we don't. I always joke. I feel like this is another version of Plato's Republic, where we're promised the dinner but don't get it. Everyone who, after reading this book of the things, we promised the discussion of legislatures. Where's the legislator? We're promised a discussion of legislature. The closest we get to the discussion of the lawgiver, the legislator, nomothetike, is in the last chapter of Book 2 of the Politics. The remainder of the Politics, maybe you can argue that in maybe in book 9, books depends how you number them, book 7 and 8, where we get the establishment of the regime, the regime we would pray for, or book 6, where we get the establishment of a democracy and oligarchy. We're given, in other words, book 6 is really the Aristotle establishing, building. It's the long lost promise thing that he doesn't fulfill in book 4 of I'm going to spend time legislating, showing how you establish regimes. Okay, establish a regime. He promises that instead of establishing a regime, we get the discussion of the threefold offices, right? The institutions. And then we go on to discussion of preservation, change in preservation, right? In book 5. It's only in book 6 that where we get a discussion of establishing majority, almost 5 chapters on democracy, 2 or 3, maybe 3 on oligarchy, and then 1 on a review of the institutions again, the offices, in light of what has been discussed. So this, in fact, some people have argued that we should understand book 6 of the Politics as part of book 4, really, before the discussion of change. But then, for some reason, Aristotle talks about legislation after discussing preservation and change, which is interesting. But that's beyond the scope of what he's doing here. So what is he's promising here is a completion of this. That we have to discuss legislation, but we don't get a full discussion of legislation. We get not a discussion of legislation, but we get examples. The general one, the best, of the one we would pray for, versus in book 6, that of the, less than perfect places. Okay? In other words, democracy. In fact, there's no discussion of any other regime. The one we would pray for was kind of an aristocratic regime, right? But we have no discussion of establishing kingships. We definitely have no establishment. We do preserve and protect. We do perpetuate, preserve, and reform monarchy, tyrannies and monarchies in book 5, chapter 10, 11. But we have no establishment of them. The only place where we have any establishment is in book 7, which establishes the regime we pray for, versus book 6, which we talk about establishing democracies and oligarchies. There's no at all account in book 6 of establishment of politeia, a regime, or this politeia called politeia. So there's absolutely complete absence of establishment. Aristotle does not. The modern regime wants. People argue that the mixed regime, or this moderating regime of that, the modern world establishes liberal democracies, right? Lots of it. But the ancients never speak of establishing this mixed regime, or this so-called mixed regime, or this polity, or mixed, or regime called regime, right? The politeia called politeia. There is no establishment. There's only the particular regimes that are established is in 7, aristocracy, and in 6, that of democracy and oligarchy. And the example of democracy is much more elaborate than the discussion of oligarchy is. So therefore, and even the most radically, the most unfavorable democracy, that of the last democracy, is something that he talks about establishing. Okay, in other words, that's even the least favorite, the democracy of the, and actually he even admits that it's dangerous. But he will explain and explain what is required that it be established, what is necessary for that. So that's very interesting. So therefore, why am I going this long discernment from here? So we're going to end this up, right? So let's go turn to this, right? He ends this paragraph with, well, we're going to have to finish up the science, the philosophy concerning human affairs. Let me complete. We need to talk about what pertains to legislation. In the latter, it is perhaps better for us to investigate it ourselves, right? And indeed, what concerns regimes in general. So regimes, and the laws and the regimes. First, then, let us attempt to go over whatever particular point has been nobly stated by our predecessor. So we have to go over our predecessor. That sounds like book 2 of the Politics, right? This is book 2 of the Politics. Book 2. We does Plato, Republic, and Laws, and then Hippodamus and the other guy, Philon, I forget the name. And then he talks about, and then on the basis of regimes collected together, and that's the best. One of the best regimes is the discussion of Sparta, the three best: the Sparta, Carthage, and Crete. Sparta, Crete, and Carthage, right? The 3 best ones, right? The three best. Not all the regimes, not less all the regimes, but the best. Let us attempt to contemplate what sort of thing preserves and destroys cities. So therefore, what are the regimes? What are the basis of regimes collected together? So the regimes. What are the what? Let's attempt to contemplate what sort of things that preserves and destroys, and that's book 5, right? And what sort of things do so for each of the regimes? So destroys, and then what sort of things do that for each regime, particular regimes, right? So again, that's book 5. He spells out what he's going to do in book 5, and through what causes such regimes are to govern well, okay, nobly. Okay, the question of how you govern nobly, that's preserving. That seems to be in 4, in some sense. 4 deals with that a little bit, and also preservation, right? This is the preserving things. Others in the contrary way, and others. So, what is the regimes that best govern nobly, and others in the contrary, how to govern regimes badly. In other words, how you govern them, even bad ones. For once these matters have been contemplated, we might perhaps better understand better also what sort of regime is best. So before we understand, the first this argument is you can't understand the best regime until you understand the regime, and how each regime has been ordered. So, in other words, for once we have considered all these matters up here, earlier points, right? We might best understand better also what sort of regime is best and how each regime has been ordered, and by making use of what laws and customs. This last part, making use of what laws and customs. With this as our beginning, then let us speak. Oh, he ends here to the introduction. This is the introduction to the politics. And in fact, this is famous. This is why Peter Simpson translate this and introduces his translation of the politics with chapter 9 of book 10 of the Ethics as his introduction, or at least this last passage is section there. Not necessarily the whole thing, but the section thereof here that deals with this. Well, we're at the end. We're stopping. We're concluding. We're going to stop. We're done. Yay, we're done. I'm probably not going to have I tell you, I probably am not going to have a Friday video for this in that sense. I will probably start the next time we start on Monday. We will probably start the Monday. I'll talk about this how to say, because maybe some people come here and say, "I don't understand this." Okay, we'll see what happens. If you've liked the video, hit the like button. Hit it like button. If you like this video, what we've done here, hit the like button. Share it far and wide. Again, liking and sharing helps the algorithm get more attention to this, so people who look for it will find it. Another thing is that if you have not subscribed, if you'd like to share it far and wide. Okay, that's right. But if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It helps the channel and introduce the channel to other people. Bring their attention to this. Help them come join the channel. Subscribe as well. By more people subscribing, we're at that near. We're near the okay. Maybe in the future, somebody's we're near the 500. We're kind of 30 short of 500. Yay! So we hope to grow some more. Another thing we need to do is if you didn't like it, you can always thumbs down it, but say why in the comments, and then we can space. People saying, "Oh, there's a fan noise in the back." Yeah, I noticed that this fan. I have to have the fan because if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be able to breathe. I'd be so toxic. Die. It's as warm weather gets, this place becomes a little smelly and so I need the air circulating a little bit. So, another thing is that if you so please say what you don't like about it, and we can learn. Maybe you didn't like a specific thing, and then other people can benefit from it. Another thing you can do is voila. Follow me on social media. The links are below. You can follow you want to follow me on social media, you can go check me out. Another thing you can do is if you want to know more about me as a scholar and as a researcher, you can do so through the social media, academic social media links below. You can check me out as a researcher, check my research out, things like that. Another way you want to help me, if you want to contribute substantially or financially, not even substantially, but even a little bit, even time, you can do so through, you want to be a patron on my channel. You can do so through Patreon or Subscribestar. The links are below. The URLs are below. And you can do so. Another way you can help is to buy one of my books. It helps. Every little thing helps. The books are listed below. You can order it either directly through your local bookstore, which is going to be, may not have it. You might be able to order it for you, but order it directly through an online bookstore like Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, or Libris, or whatever. Or you may order it directly through the publisher. These are all ways you can do this. Well, that's it. We're finished with the Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Congratulations, we're done. I promised people I would start doing the new edition of Machiavelli's Prince, and then maybe I will start a Nicomachean Ethics or something like that next. Okay. Well, take care. Bye bye, and have a great day. See you.